This next person, I am amazed by her every time I go to her. She's a doctor that I go to. I'm amazed at her spirit, and I am so honored to have her as one of our Soul Talks speaker. It's Dr. Gail Patricia Derin, and she's a doctor of Oriental medicine and a licensed acupuncturist, religious science and interfaith minister, and licensed unity teacher. For over 35 years, she's worked in the field of structural and energetic healing, working with the principles of traditional Chinese medicine. She teaches classes and workshops and has a private practice. Gail has co-written 2 books. First one is Poisons That Heal and Help and Homeopathy. That's interesting. What to do before 9/11 arises. Today, her Soul Talk is titled Healing from Within. Please welcome Dr. Gail Derin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's great to be here and meeting some wonderful people from probably. So I wanted to start out by saying that I had a perfect childhood. No, and I too am 5 years old. So what I'm going to talk about is healing from within. And this is my binky. I gave everybody a little handout. It may not make any sense to you right now, but it may later. And it will as we go along. This is my binky because ever since I hit menopause, there have been times where I'm like, where did that thought go? Yeah. And so it's just a little anchor for me to just in case I kind of lose my way. Anyway, we're talking about healing from within, and healing is about returning to wholeness. And within is kind of, who knows, because they're able to measure thought way out here. And if we're in the field, maybe we're all just part of this whole field so that when we heal here, we're healing out here and vice versa. We're not going to go there, though. We might a little. How we're going to do that is we're going to talk about principles of Taoism and Chinese medicine about how to restore wholeness and healing. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a little bit about my own path and how it led me to that. So I am a world traveler, and my traveling experience began very modestly. I was 3 years old, and I was on my little tricycle, and I was pedaling west, because as I saw that setting sun, it was like, get me out of this cold Michigan weather. I got to get out of here. And my healing career began when I was 4 years old. And that was when my mom would mention she had a headache. And as soon as she mentioned she had a headache, my other 3 siblings would split, and I would be left to do little massages on her head and her shoulders. And miraculously, her headaches went away when she divorced my father. So then I went into Catholic school. Already it's beginning here. And I was from 3rd to 8th grade, and what we did was we went to church 5 days a week, catechism on Saturday, and church on Sunday. And I won't even go into that, but can you imagine having to do confession every day when you're not really that bad? You had to make stuff up, didn't you? So I remember on one catechism lesson, they were talking about the soul. And they were saying it's like this big white blob, and you have little black spots or gray spots or white spots on the soul, depending if you did a cardinal sin or a venial sin, or, heaven forbid, a mortal sin. So a mortal sin was if you killed somebody, or if you missed church on Sunday. So you can imagine the confusion at age 7 when I said, you know, God, I know I'm going to move away from you, but don't let me go too far, okay? So in my home, there was actually a lot of violence. There's physical violence. There was a verbal and abusive violence. And at church, there was a lot of violence too. You know, the nuns, they wield a mighty stick. And on the way home from school, there was always Muffy, who beat me up just because she could. And then later in life, I was stalked, I was choked, I was beaten up. And do you ever notice, though, that your challenges often bring you your greatest gifts? So what it did was it led me into the field of martial arts to protect myself, to kind of like make it home from school alive. But it also got me exposed to Chinese medicine, Taoism, and then going to China. And what I learned there in all of those is that we are connected to nature. And that there's a natural order of things. Well, I didn't necessarily know a natural order. I knew chaos. But the Chinese always said there was a plan. So I just went head first to saying, well, if they know how to restore wholeness, maybe there's something I could learn from this. So I'm going to share some Daoist secrets. Everybody loves the secret. And the first secret to be healthy is that things are as they are. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it's if you have a round peg, you'll put it in a round hole, right? The ego would say, no, we're going to take a round peg and we're going to try to force it into a square hole, right? Cleverness would say, let's design a way to put a round peg into a square hole. And knowledge or trying to figure it out would say, why doesn't the round peg fit into the square hole, right? So there are 5 principles of moving energy. There's 5 principles of nature. And I'm going to explore how I learned from those principles and when I went against them and the consequences of that. One of the things I also appreciate, I study Tai Chi, and my Tai Chi teacher said, if you really want to understand Tai Chi, study Taoism or study Al-Anon. Okay. And he said, I'm too old to study Taoism. So I just opened the book, and it was called The Courage to Change. And it said, the most intimate relationship we're ever going to have is with ourselves. Wouldn't it behoove us to actually be kind, or actually to spend some time to not only get familiar, but to actually, like you said, bring a little more joy, bring the vacation here, to be more tender and compassionate with ourselves. So, this natural order of things, I'm going to talk about the 5 elements here. And I'm going to start with this big white circle here, because it represents this energy of how to restore balance. And the first one, it happens to be the element of air, which is the first breath we take. And the element of air is to take the time to let something in and then to let it go. Now, if we all took a deep breath, that feels good, doesn't it? But if I said, hold it, hold it, hold it, we've got to let it go. And you notice sometimes in our life we like to accumulate, and then all of a sudden we're like, what's all this? Just to help me feel myself? And we have to let it go. And it's no coincidence that the lung, the opening of this particular portal, is the nose, and the large intestine are connected. Do you ever notice what it's like to be in a garbage strike in New York City, in Chinatown, near a fish market? So you can imagine if that lower portal isn't open, you know, the constipation song is I Keep Holding On. We've got to take things in and we've got to let things go. And so if this element is weak, we're very melancholic. And if it's strong, we're courageous. One of the things that I have noticed is, well, let me just share a story. Not too long ago, maybe about 10 months ago, my mom passed. And I have a spiritual counselor. He's only 34 years old, and he's completely awake. And what he said to me, my mom had been in the hospital. She got moved to a rehab center in Michigan. Someone called me when they went to visit her, and they said, something's definitely not right. You got to fly out there right now. So I called him, and he said, I'm going to ask you to do something, and it's going to be simple, but it's not going to be easy. He said, I'm going to ask you to be very present with whatever shows up and don't distract yourself, no matter what. Well, and he says, and I just want you to breathe with her. You know, our breath is probably our greatest anchor right from birth. We can't breathe into the future. We can't breathe into the past. We can only have this moment. And I believe that we underestimate the power of our breath to actually help us return back to that center that both of you were speaking about. So I go there, and I wasn't prepared. She was in a situation which was a rehab center that was very abusive. She was covered with bruises. This very woman that I know, she was screaming. She was in pain. She was frightened. And I at first, of course, went into doctor mode. You know, how can I fix this? How can I make changes? And there was a point where I realized I just had to be present. And of course, what happens is all those things start to percolate like an old coffee pot at first. And then it becomes like a geyser, like Old Faithful. And I just kept saying, okay, I'm keeping my commitment. I just want to be really present no matter what. Do you know what it's like, the gift that we can give each other to be present with another without trying to change them or fix them? And just to be present? And what I believe happened in that moment, even it was in the middle of a scream, our eyes met, and it was like soul meeting soul. She gave me the greatest gift, and I believe in that moment I actually gave her that sense of being met as well. So my question to you is, what can we do for healing to bring the moment in to be present with ourselves and to be present with another? And then know that when we're holding on, that the breath is the greatest combustor to let things go. So the first thing would be, how do we use our presence and our breath to heal? How do we use this portal of absorbing, being willing? You know, in our culture, we're not very taught to be very emotionally aware. So how do we actually foster that? And I believe it's the breath that actually helps us do the most courageous thing, which is when we're feeling our feelings, we think it's never going to end. Guess what? It does. And often our feelings just say, I just need to be felt. And when we do, something shifts. And when we don't open those portals, see, what Taoism believes is when we open the portals, we move stagnation. So the first portal is our breath. The second element, which is the water element, has to do with the kidneys, the bladder, and the element is about flow. It's the element of water. Water reflects, but it doesn't absorb. Well, we know what that actually does if we do Emoto's work. But really traditionally, that water is a reflector, like a mirror. So this is about fear versus being more reflective. When I don't know myself, I'm going to listen. The opening is the ears. I'm going to listen for you to tell me who I am. And the more I get more inner directed and actually start listening to what is my original nature or what is my truth, then I don't have to look for those cues so much out there, do I? So the Daoist, well, let me go back to when I was a kid, being that there was so much abuse in the family, I would go to the lake down the road. And I would talk to it as if it was a friend. And I would just share all the things that were going on. And then I would listen. You know how much stillness there is in nature and how much it can actually tell us? So the next Daoist secret is listen to learn. Listen to be heard. Also, it says follow the nature of things. Don't try to force something from happening. And sometimes, have you ever noticed when something happens and you go, oh, that had to happen, so this could happen. We may not prefer it, but there's this great unfolding. But how many of us have tried to push upstream? So there was a time when I was back in Unity Village where my ex-husband was studying to become a minister, and there was this couple, and my own minister was coming from Arizona. And I said, oh, you've got to meet this man. He's a brilliant speaker. And I took this couple and I just about hog-tied them to come and hear this speaker. Well, they didn't want to go. And my enthusiasm and my determination made them go. And this guy got up and spoke, and he spoke gobbledygook. Nothing made sense. He stuttered. He kept losing his trend of thought. He took an early break, and they split. He came back, and he was like, wow, I don't know what just got over me. And he was brilliant. And I knew what it was. I knew the universe was teaching me a lesson about forcing things. And what wisdom, which is when we have reflection, we actually gain that wisdom. Wisdom is about offering and then letting go. I have no idea what was right for them. I thought I did. And notice what happens when we do, when we force that river. So the second portal is to open to our listening. What am I listening for in order to heal? The third element is the wood element. And the wood element is this green one, and it has to do with the liver and the gallbladder, which is about planning, which is about making decisions. And what that has to do with is wood. Am I either, in the emotional part, am I willing to be flexible and kind, or am I moving more into being like a willow or being like petrified wood? Am I frustrated, irritable, depressed, shouting? That's the sound of the liver when it's overheated. And everything in this element is about relationship. We have things that are showing up in our environment all the time. Are we willing to be open and be in relationship to those energies? Or are we fighting against it? Like RJ on the way here. So either with this element we uplift our soul or we're pulling ourselves down. And this is about discernment. What is right for me and what isn't. I got the 5-minute mark. So the fourth element is the heart. And the heart can either be warm, it can be fiery, it can be burnt and scorched, or it can be dried out and cold. And we've all had those times of being indifferent in our lives, or we've met with indifference. So this portal is about speech. Our words can heal, our words can slay. And ask yourself when you're saying something, does this promote healing for myself? Is it good for me? Is it good for others? Is it good for the planet? And we might look at how to speak more mindfully. Again, we want to change our beliefs or attitudes, we have to open these portals. The last element is the earth element. And the earth element is about nourishment. It's about knowing whether or not we're going to get stuck in the mud with too much sympathy or too much attachment, or are we willing to be open, like you said before too. And this element, the irony is the more control we have is the less control we actually give to the situation. And they have a principle called Wu Wei, which means there's nothing to do, but yet nothing is left undone. So a friend of mine says, well, I'd stay in bed all day. Well, not necessarily, because there'll be certain things that'll just emerge from you, like I got to go to the bathroom, or I got to eat, or I got to put a roof over my head. There's things that will naturally emerge when we're not at fight within ourselves or in our own environment. How are we nourishing our lives? I'm going to ask you, why do you want to heal? Why do you want wholeness? So sympathy would be jumping in a hole after somebody else, on top of them. Empathy would be, can I walk in your shoes to know then the right way to contribute to you? So I want to go back to St. Augustine, who said, empty the mind and come to your senses. So how we change those formed beliefs that started from very young is to breathe, is to listen inside and to what forces are around us to promote our healing, is to see what we hold in our hand, what we see in our mind, we're going to hold in our hand, is to speak words that promote your own healing, like you said, to just keep speaking it until those thoughts start to reflect in the environment, and then to feel and to nourish. So my siblings ended up, even though in that environment, each one of them now contribute to ending suffering for another. Because of that, again, we transform that suffering, all of us, into our gifts, don't we? And so in closing, I'd like to say that I spoke briefly about the Tao, which is called the great unknowable, the great void, the great nothing. So hopefully tonight or today, I've shared nothing. And in opening those portals, have given you your world to everything. Thank you.
Ooh, yummy. Wow. So, go ahead and ask some questions. I just had to give her a hug. I'm sorry.
So the question I would have you ask another person first, and then just have a brief sharing. If there were one of those portals that you know as your growing edge, where you might need to work on, or to actually further your own healing, which one of those 5 would it be? I'll give you about 2 minutes to share with another person, and then I'm going to ask a couple people to shout it out. So, Good. Okay. I just wanted to know if maybe 2 or 3 people could just share what that was for them. Oh, good. Can we get a mic over here? Can we have a mic?
What's your cutting edge?
Our relationship, Jennifer tends to do all the speaking, right? So I need to develop more my speaking voice, and she needs to develop more her hearing and listening. So we're going to work on that.
Nice. All right. Anyone else? Deborah.
Mary and I agreed that listening, especially when you're trying to do something and trying to force it, and it's not working, and it's not working, and it's not working, and it's perhaps, if you would listen to that not working and stop and back off and come at it again later. So we agreed on listening.
Very good. One more? Yes.
Like I need a mic. One thing that came to mind when you just said that about listening and about you were talking about forcing it and whatnot, it builds a sense of trust and faith in yourself that, and that's scary. Like, well, if I don't force this, if I sit here and wait, and, you know, it develops a sense of trust in myself, though, when I allow that to happen.
And that's the beauty of when we're able to go into that void and that unknowing and being willing to just traverse there, that's where the gifts, that's where the magic happens. And it's the most scary, vulnerable place we can go, and yet isn't that the most ironic thing of all? That's where everything reveals itself to us. So I just have to say, you guys are an amazing audience, and I just feel so blessed to be here. Thank you so much.